TV legend Keith Floyd was a charismatic bon vivant with an irreverent twinkle in his eye. Over the years, he's taken us on a groundbreaking tour of the world's cuisine, stopping regularly en route for the obligatory slurp of fine wine. An original, he's been much imitated but never really bettered.
Hello, dear gastronauts. Do you realise that for the price of, half a bitter, you can have a fishy treat with a bunch of sprats?
He's been a part of the TV landscape for so long, it's easy to forget what a revolutionary Keith Floyd was. Truly pioneering, he was the original rock and roll TV super chef.
Basically, I think Keith was a rock and roll star.
He was flamboyant, he was energetic, he was kind of literally, you got this idea that you never quite knew what was going to happen next.
I wish I could have been as spontaneous as Keith.
He was mercurial.
He just went up and then burst, really.
To make the perfect shellfish gumbo, you need a fistful of dollars. Thank you.
He brought panache and energy and style and fun.
Floyd was really the first TV chef to drag cooking, kicking and screaming out of the studio.
Ginger, red peppers, garlic, chilies.
You know, he was a great British eccentric, but he was also very modern at the same time. What an achievement.
I think Keith was actually one of the first bad boy TV chefs, really, because he was irreverent.
It seems to be a terrible thing to do to your family, but I always wanted my mother-in-law on one of my programmes, and it's taken me 25 years to catch her, actually.
He drank on screen.
Please excuse me.
And his whole show was punctuated by the Stranglers' Peaches.
Walking on the beaches, looking at the beaches. All you had to do was put a camera on him and allow him to be himself.
So, if this takes a little time to cook, bear with me, because we don't pull things out of the oven that we've, just happened to have ready, like all those other TV programmes.
Before Keith Floyd bounded onto our screens in 1984, cooking on TV was very different.
It had become a very, very staid, a very studio-based format, I think, the cookery programme.
And I always put a penny on when I'm cooking, because I'm inclined to drop things down the front of my dress.
Yes. They were all very staid.
The proof will come when we take the top off, won't it, Mr. Barrett, eh?
Yes. They were all very, like school teachers.
Well, hello again, and welcome to the cookery course.
They were all very pompous.
I'm very unsure in my own mind that there's anything which has contributed more to modern cookery than kitchen foil.
I can't remember when, that fearsome woman, Fanny Craddock, was on. I mean, I never enjoyed that. I mean, I just didn't see the point of it. All that sort of bossiness and that poor henpecked husband of hers. There was Delia, of course, and I did have a lot of time for Delia because she did it very well.
If you want to make an omelette for one person, you need 2 eggs. If it's a very hungry person, you could use 3.
But bless her, it was more of a sort of course than actually getting stuck into the wine.
So much of cookery programmes is prepared in advance, it's all worked out very carefully, and the camera angles and the camera shots and bits that are prepared earlier.
For this, I need to begin with bean sprouts.
And I think by taking that convention head on, as to say, no, we're going to do it in real time, we're going to stick a camera on it and see if it works. He just reinvented it completely.
Born in Southampton in the early 40s, his family wasn't posh. In fact, his dad worked for the electricity board. But Floyd did go to a posh school, and then after a brief spell as a local newspaper reporter in Bristol, he joined the Royal Tank Regiment as a second lieutenant. Army life wasn't a natural fit for Floyd, but it did give him a taste of what he really wanted to do, be a chef. After odd-jobbing his way around France, Floyd went on to open his own restaurant in 1966, by which time he was married and a dad.
He worked morning, noon and night. I don't think he slept, and the pressures must have been enormous because they started with virtually no money. And then everything started to grow quite rapidly, and at the end he had 3 restaurants within a very short period of time, in his 20s. Absolutely extraordinary.
By the end of the decade, things were going wrong. He sold up and spent a year sailing around the Med, dabbling in antiques and fine wines, of course. Eventually mooring up in the south of France, opening a restaurant in L'Isle-sur-la-Sorgue. Floyd returned to Blighty in the 80s, opening a restaurant in Bristol with wife number 2 in tow. It was here that TV producer David Pritchard walked into his life.
His bistro in Bristol was lovely. I mean, it had a distinctive smell. It was a sort of mixture of butter and garlic and coffee and a little hint of goulas. I remember going there for the very first time, and he just said, so, what do you do then? What do you do for a living and everything? And I said, well, I'm a TV producer. He said, they come in my restaurant, they say I'd be fabulous on television, they drink my best brandy, and I never see them again.
But Pritchard came back and found him a slot on a local youth show.
Before that, though, something we've never done before on RPM, and that's a cookery lesson. Not just any old cookery lesson, mind you, because we asked Keith Floyd to make a meal for 6.
And so the next day I drove round to the restaurant with a little contract, and I said, look, cook a meal for 6 people for less than £1 a head.
Hello, gastronauts. I didn't suppose you expected to see me on a rock and roll programme.
And there were, I mean, 3 huge rabbits the size of whippets. There was bottles of brandy, bottles of chanterelle mushrooms, there was all sorts of things going there. And he completely disregarded my instructions.
And this food has got to taste like sunshine at the end of the day. It hasn't got to taste bland, it's got to have punch and love and happiness in it. And you won't get that by, for instance, picking up 9 grains of salt and gently putting them in. You've got to throw things into the pan. You've got to put your heart, your guts, everything into it.
He was okay, the sequence. But afterwards he said, I'll remember I was standing outside of his restaurant with him after the filming, and he said, do you know, he said, one day cooks are going to be as famous as racing car drivers and rock guitarists. And he was right. I didn't think so at the time, but he was right.
Rock and roll was in Floyd's DNA. He knew the Stranglers from his Bristol restaurant. He was a genuine fan, and they provided the distinctive soundtracks to his early shows. Floyd and Pritchard's hit series Floyd on Fish has become a blueprint for today's campaigning super chefs, Jamie, Gordon and Hugh.
Floyd on Fish was really something of a manifesto for Floyd, because he was so passionate about the kind of fish that we have in Britain, in our waters around Britain, and very frustrated, I think, by this British sort of anxiety about fish.
Do you know, none of you lot will eat these. All of these are going to Spain, to France, to Italy, and they'll be the centrepiece of a most fabulous assiette of fruits de mer. And you'll crack open the claws, dip it into unctuous yellow mayonnaise, and think, as they must think, what fools the Brits are for not taking advantage of the wonderful things we've got around our shores.
Actually, although it was fantastically entertaining, at one level this was a campaigning series, because this was Floyd saying, look, haddock and chips, cod and chips, fish fingers, is that all we're good for?
I remember it was at a French seaside port, and there was a lot of school kids being taught by their teacher. And he asked these kids a question.
Mes enfants, aimez-vous les huîtres?
Oui! Voila. That's it, isn't it? I mean, what more can you want?
He's so thrilled, but also he's a little bit broken-hearted, because you can see that he thinks this is how food culture should be, where your children are shown everything and where it's quite normal for school kids to be eating oysters.
Always happy to share the screen with talent, Floyd featured a young restaurateur unwittingly setting him on the path to become a household name himself. Feast your eyes on a young Rick Stein.
This was the first piece I did with Keith. I remember it was a roasted sea bass stuffed with some vegetables with a sorrel sauce and a bottle of Riesling. I can remember it to this day. It's so important to me.
Yeah. One of the most important things about Floyd on Fish is the drinking that goes with it, because no good cooking comes without good drinking.
It was just, you know, mischievous. There was lots of boozing.
Hey, welcome to your kitchen.
Well, cheers. Cheers. The wine's very nice.
Well, it is, isn't it?
In those days, one did film and drink. These days, sadly, film only. We drink later.
Which is?
Slip-ups and mistakes were an intrinsic part of the show and celebrated.
You can roast it, Nick tells me, too. So that's what we're going to do with this one. He's going to show us how to do it.
It was the first time I'd ever been on screen with Keith. I'd met him quite a few times before, which, looking at again, the fact he called me Nick, I wonder why.
This is Nick's own very special recipe.
Rick, dear boy, Rick.
Rick! Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Well, once you've seen one cook, you've seen them all, haven't you?